Now, six senior former editors of the Hong Kong newspaper Apple Daily have pleaded guilty to colluding with foreign forces. The charges, filed under the territory's sweeping national security law imposed by Beijing. The defendants arrived at the Hong Kong High Court under heavy security. They've been held ever since police raided their newsroom in June last year. One of them served as an executive of Apple Daily's parent company, the Next Media Group. Prosecutors accuse the suspects of asking foreign countries to launch hostile acts against the Chinese government, including sanctions. They say some of the defendants will testify in the trial of the paper's founder, Jimmy Lai, in December. He's expected to plead not guilty to the same charge. Well, for more of this, let's cross over to London to speak to Arise correspondent Laurie Laird, who's a former resident of Hong Kong and knows the territory very well. Good to see you, Laurie. So these top six people from Apple Daily have now pleaded guilty to collusion to endanger national security. Tell us about their case and what it focused on.
Well, this case comes under the new national security laws, Charles, that came into effect on the 30th of June, 2021. And this was a real surprise. We had seen it coming because of all of those protests during 2019. But this is the first time we have seen this used. And it's a loosely written law, Charles, but it talks about sedition. It talks about collusion and conspiracy with foreign powers. Now, what these six pleaded guilty to is conspiring with Jimmy Lai, who was the founder of Apple Daily and a whole media empire that really piqued the interest of the Chinese authorities. They have pleaded guilty to collusion with Mr. Lai. His trial will begin next week. So there certainly is a feeling, Charles, that these six, the guilty plea was a little bit surprising. We weren't expecting that. And the feeling is that perhaps they have entered guilty plea to earn a lesser sentence, which their sentence will not come down until after Mr. Lai's trial.
Now, Laurie, you talked about Jimmy Lai there, who is the focus of that trial that you mentioned that's due to begin, I think, next week, actually. Tell us about him.
That's right, next Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, tell us about him. I mean, he's the charismatic billionaire founder of Apple Daily, who later turned his hand to political matters.
That's right, although political in more of a roundabout way. But he started in the rag trade, Charles. He was a small clothing trader, and then developed his own set of department stores. Called Gabbana's, very, very well known chain store in Hong Kong. You saw one almost like a Primark. Saw one in every street corner. Then turned his hand to journalism, but with a political aspect to it. But his stuff was always very, very well followed. It was a very accessible tab. Apple Daily was I remember when it was launched, I'm giving myself away there, but a very tabloid format, and not as political when it first started, but became so over the years, particularly after the handover of Hong Kong from the UK to China in 1997.
And Laurie, I know you touched on this briefly earlier, but some of the six who pleaded guilty today are thought to be gearing up to testify against Mr. Lai. I mean, what more can you tell us about that?
Well, that is the assumption, and it is because prosecutors have mentioned earlier today that a couple, and they did not say exactly how many would be testifying against Mr. Lai, but certainly that guilty plea does seem to signify that they will be going further. And again, the assumption is in exchange for a lighter sentence. The six face a maximum penalty of life imprisonment for the crimes to which they have pleaded guilty. Feeling is that they will accept a lighter sentence for pleading for testifying against Mr. Lai. We do understand from hints that Mr. Lai's lawyers that have given us that he will be pleading not guilty. Again, he would be facing life imprisonment as well.
And Laurie, we've got about 30 seconds left on this section. I mean, you lived in Hong Kong. What are you hearing from your chums there about the mood now? All quiet and, all the agitation beaten out, as it were?
Absolutely. But do you know what's interesting, Charles? I have not experienced a mass exodus of friends and colleagues who have left Hong Kong en masse. Many of my colleagues in Hong Kong have pretty much made their peace with a very, very different Hong Kong, an area, a place in which they cannot express themselves the way they did pre-97. Now, many of them have left journalism. Many have moved into other areas of work, public relations. Some have gone off to Singapore, but a large number remain in Hong Kong, just in areas other than journalism. It is like many have made their peace. And certainly the quality of life in Hong Kong can be, at certain levels of the income scale, can be very comfortable.
Well, Laurie, thanks very much for that. And while you're here, let's catch up on some of the business headlines of the day. Lots of focus on the energy markets, I understand.
Absolutely. Let's start with gas, Charles. And just when you thought that Russia could not turn the taps any lower, there is one gas line still going to Europe that runs underneath Ukraine. Russia has threatened to turn this off by the 28th of November. The premise is they say that Ukraine is accumulating, and that is a translation of the word the Russian authorities have used, accumulating gas that was meant to go to Moldova. Russia says that if Ukraine does not give up that gas, that they will turn off that entire gas pipeline or a portion of that gas pipeline, which sends stuff to Ukraine and also further afield to further places western in Europe. So it could, Russian supplies of gas to Europe have almost dried up, there still is a little bit going through, and that's a matter of concern.
And I might have missed the last bit of what you said, but don't worry.
I'm having trouble with volume with the audio as well, Charles.
Right. Well, the audience heard you, just not me. But just at the risk of making you repeat yourself, how is this Russian further cut to gas supplies likely to affect the gas markets?
Well, surprisingly, it hasn't had that much of an upward, it hasn't caused all that much upward pressure on gas prices. They were up about 4% right after this news came out, come down a bit now, up 2%, which is really a very, very small movement. You see that on any given day. But I think that the markets may be underestimating the effect that this could have. The European markets have done very well with getting a lot of gas into storage before the winter. We have also had a very mild autumn here in Europe, so we haven't used as much gas as we ordinarily would for this time of year. The problem will be is that there isn't enough gas in storage to get through the winter. So as European countries take that gas out of storage, they're going to want to be replenishing it in case there is an emergency situation. And that replenishing will be very, very difficult with the taps from Russia essentially turned off.
Absolutely, and of course it's a bit of a worry with winter on its way. But let's take a look at the crude oil markets, Laurie. A bit of excitement over the past few days.
Yeah, this is a story I think has been really underreported. Now, oil prices down to about $83 a barrel. We're up a little bit today, and we'll get to that in a moment. But I think the important thing here is that after Joe Biden's exhortation to get the Middle East to keep pumping gas, or keep pumping crude oil, crude oil prices have actually come down of their own accord. And there's every reason to expect that crude oil prices will continue to come down. And the reason is that the Western world that uses so much crude oil for energy, for driving, for all sorts of things, is heading into what could be a recession, or at least a very, very slow growth phase in Western Europe. And there simply will be less of a need for energy. So as Joe Biden was berating OPEC for not pumping enough oil, he sort of forgot that the price of oil might come down anyway as economies slow.
Laurie, thanks very much indeed. Laurie Laird, Arise business correspondent, talking to me there from London.